welcome everyone. My name's Philip Bullock and I'm the Russian tutor here at Wadham. And I've got a couple of poems that I want to look at with you today. And please do immediately post chats, reactions and questions and comments in the chat, because if this were really happening in person, I'd be asking you to do that and to speak, but we're online here. I've chosen two short poems because I think, for me, Russian literature is above all about poetry. We often think about it as a tradition of novels, Tolstoy's War and Peace, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, or the Brothers Karamazov in the 20th century, Bulgakov's Master and Margarita, so big novels about history, about ideas, about philosophy, about the nation. And they're very exciting and important. And I love teaching them and reading them. But poetry is also very, very important. And it's a wonderful thing to study because it's compact, it's short, but it's also very rich and complex. And I think the text that I've chosen will show that, I hope. So a quick question to you, and please put the answer in the chat. Does anybody already speak Russian? So no comments in the chat, I think. So it sounds as if I might be talking to a group of people who are coming at it for the first time. Oh, Natalia, yes, I did wonder about the name of Kuznetsova, but it doesn't matter whether you speak it or not, because the texts that I've chosen, as you'll see, will be given in both languages. And I just need to share the screen with you now. And I hope you can perhaps see the text in front of you.
Looks great.
Only in Cyrillic. That's okay for you, is it?
Yeah, looks fine on my screen.
Okay, so this is a very famous poem from the 19th century, but I'm not going to tell you who wrote it yet. And it gives rise to one of the most famous lines of Russian, which is the first one. Умом Россию не понять, which is often just quoted out of context by people. And you'll find out why in a minute. So here are the 4 lines of the poem, and this is the entire poem. Умом Россию не понять, аршином общим не измерить, у ней особенная стать, в Россию можно только верить. And I chose this because it's one of the poems I learned first in Russian and then learned by memory, but also because it's very extensively quoted either in its 4 lines or just for the very first line. And we'll come on to see why in a minute. So I'll now read it again. And for those of you who don't speak Russian, you can now follow the transliteration. So I've written out using English letters the sound of the Russian. Умом Россию не понять, аршином общим не измерить. У ней особенная стать, в Россию можно только верить. So in the red, you can see the same text. Like we can tell it's a poem because it's laid out in 4 lines. You might have heard, even in my anglicized Russian, the rhyme. So понять and стать rhyme, измерить, верить rhyme, and also that it has a regular beat. Умом Россию не понять, аршином общим не измерить. У ней особенная стать, в Россию можно только верить. It has all the attributes of lyric poetry. Now, what does this mean? And I wanted to begin with the sounds, because one of the things that's very attractive about poetry, and Emily will be talking about song and poetry and how they interact, is that sound world, the way that sound patterning, alliteration, assonance, rhyme, meter create a large part of its effect. It does something that ordinary speech doesn't do. Also, what's fascinating about Russian is how very concise and precise it can be as a language. It is a language with 6 cases, and it does a lot with those cases, and it's particularly complex but exciting grammar. And so here is my very literal translation. Умом Россию не понять. Now, the word umom is a single word in Russian, which translates the English with mind. Россию не понять. Now, Россия is a word you might well know or be able to guess as the Russian word for Russia, but not Россия. That would be the object case, so the I form, I go, I sing, I swim, but the subject case, so I saw him, I fed the dog, so the latter of those nouns. So Россию не понять, Russia not, and then an infinitive, to understand. It goes on using the same construction with yardstick, common, not to measure. Now, don't worry, this isn't making much sense in English, and it's not meant to. What I'm trying to show you is how Russian organizes its expression in a very different way from English, because it has case endings. So it doesn't matter what place a word comes in a sentence, because the case ending will tell you what function it is playing in that sentence. So with yardstick, common, not to measure. In English, we would say the other way around. We put adjectives before the nouns, a common yardstick, a common measure. But in Russian, you can put verb and adjective in any order you like. You can even separate them entirely in the sentence. The third line, у ней особенная стать, literally means with her, and I've translated this as her because Russian has grammatical gender, masculine, feminine, and neuter, and Россия is grammatically feminine. Like other languages, La France in French, you can play with the grammatical gender of inanimate nouns. So with her, a particular character, в Россию можно только верить. In Russia, possible only to believe. So you can see here the very flexible word order that Russian has at its disposal, and how this can be used to create sound and argument. Also, other things to point out is you will see that there's one mistake I made. I put in the third line with her a particular character. I should have put here with her particular character. Russian does not have articles, the and a. So not with a mind or with the mind or my mind, but just with mind. And not with a yardstick, but with yardstick. So Russian is actually more concise than English because it does without these. So we've gone from the sound of Russian only, written in Cyrillic, which probably was quite alien to various of you. It's gone now to the transliterated sounds in English so that you can at least follow them as well as listen to them. I've then gone to a verbatim translation, which looks very strange, ungrammatical, and unidiomatic in English, just to give you a sense of the underlying structure. And now we need to work out how to get it into English. What I've done here is a first pass of my own. With the mind, one cannot understand Russia. With a common yardstick, one cannot measure her. She has a particular character. In Russia, it is possible only to believe. And you can see here what I've had to do. I've had to put in articles with the mind, with a common yardstick. I've had to turn around this strange construction, which was Russia not to understand, to get what it really means in English is one cannot understand Russia, one cannot measure her. In English, I've had to put in here the object of the sentence. In Russian, it's omitted. And this construction in the third line, Russian doesn't use a verb for to have in this context. It uses a different one. With her, there is a particular character. In Russian, say, I have a book, you say, with me, book. I've translated here this more idiomatically as she has a particular character. And I've kept she, for the time being, as a feminine noun for Russian. And finally, in Russia, it is possible. So можно, the Russian word on its own means possible. We don't actually have a verb for to be in the present tense in this circumstance. So in Russian, one says, in Russia, possible only to believe. In English, we need to add in it is to make the sentence work. So slowly, step by step, I'm bringing this poem away from its underlying Russian structures, phraseology, and grammar towards something more recognizably English. And so that is an improvement, I hope, in terms of our understanding of the poem. But what we have lost is any of its beauty, its rhythm, its sounds. Умом Россию не понять, аршином общим не измерить. У ней особенная сталь, в Россию можно только верить. My English is dreadful in comparison. It's banal, it's ordinary, it's not even very good English. So what I've done is actually go to a genius. I'll come to him in a minute. Here is the poet that we're reading, Fyodor Tyutchev, a 19th century romantic poet who actually had a fascinating career. He was a diplomat who spent a very large amount of his life living in Italy and particularly in Germany. And he wrote poetry on the side, didn't publish very much, but was widely respected as one of the most talented, intellectually complex, rich, gifted poets of the period. Interestingly, he was also very close to what we call the Slavophile movement. And this was a group of people who were keen to celebrate Russia's particular traditions. We saw in the previous translation there, Russia has a particular character, he says, and that's very indicative of his philosophy, which was trying not to bring Russia close to Western Europe, but to separate Russia from Western Europe and work out what made it special and distinct. I said my translation was dreadful, so instead let's turn to a better one by Vladimir Nabokov. Nabokov, you may have heard of, but possibly not as a Russian writer, but as an American writer. He left Russia after the October Revolution and lived in Berlin and in Paris, eventually moved to the United States, and he gave up writing in Russian and instead wrote in English, most famously the novel Lolita. He was a brilliant writer in both languages, and his Russian novels are extremely worthy of attention and exploration, arguably perhaps more than the American ones, I would say, but that's my preference. And here he is, jotting down some ideas while someone else drives the car. And here is his translation of Tyutchev's poem. One cannot understand her with the mind, nor take her measure with a caliper. Her state and stamp are of a special kind. All one can do is believe in her. And you can see immediately why this is better than my version, because what it's done is taken the Russian ideas, and all of the ideas we saw, first in the Russian, then in the transliteration, and then in my verbatim translation, are there, slightly rearranged. He's had to go for the word caliper rather than other words. Yardstick was the one I proposed. And arshin is an old Russian measure. You know, in English we have yards and miles, as well as meters and kilometers. And Russia also has its own particular words of measurement. And so Tyutchev was there using an old and traditional Russian word rather than a modern European one. I like his third line, her state and stamp, because the Russian there was stat. And so he's even got an English word, state, that sounds a little like the original Russian if you knew it. All one could do is believe in her. And you can see too that Nabokov has kept the feminine gender of Russia, her measure, her, understand her with the mind. And he's given it the title Russia because he's taken out Russia from the first line, which was there in Tyutchev's poem. So here's a writer of genius from the 20th century translating another writer of genius from the 19th century and showing how, with care, attention, insight, and some moments of inspiration, it is possible to translate poetry into a foreign language and translate not just its ideas and its content, but also translate its rhythm, its rhymes, and its sound patterns. It's very hard, but it is possible. And it is one of the things that we do here, is translate regularly and extensively from all foreign languages that we learn into English. Teaches you a lot about your native tongue, And it also helps you develop a real sense of nuance and understanding. I haven't said too much about the content of this poem, but it perhaps is an interesting one to think about the statement that you cannot understand a country like Russia rationally with a mind, but you must believe in her. It's almost a religious poem. So I'll move on to a slightly different poem, and not in so much depth, but just by contrast. And again, I won't tell you who wrote it for a little while, and I'm not even going to give it to you in English or in transliteration for the immediate part of what I'm going to say, because I think we should always attend to the sound of poetry and the strange look of it, especially when it's written in a script that we don't necessarily understand. Он любил 3 вещи на свете: за вечернее пение, белых павлинов и стертые карты Америки. Не любил, когда плачут дети, не любил чай с малиной и женской истерики. А я была его женой. So a very different poem from the previous one. It's short, yes, 7 lines here, but much less of the fixed rhyme and rhythm of the previous poem. So rather different. Here it is in English, transliteration, sorry, into English letters, and you can see how strange it looks. Он любил 3 вещи на свете: за вечернее пение, белых павлинов и стертые карты Америки. Не любил, когда плачут дети, не любил чая с малиной и женской истерики. А я была его женой. Here it is with a verbatim translation. And I've left out the last line because I'm going to ask you in a minute to pop into the chat what you think the last line should be in English, if you would like. He loved 3 things in the world: vespers, you could also translate it as evensong, it's a church service, white peacocks, and antique maps of America. He didn't like children crying. He didn't like tea with raspberry jam and female hysterics. So the poem lists in the first 3 lines things he loved or he liked. The Russian word любить means both love or to like. Vespers, white peacocks, and maps of America. Religion, exotic birds, and adventuring. And this man, and we know it's a man because grammatically on is masculine in Russian, he didn't like 3 other things: children crying, tea with jam, and female hysterics. So this man doesn't like domestic life: children, especially children crying, tea with raspberries. It's a Russian tradition that when you drink tea, you don't drink it with milk, but possibly a slice of lemon, and on the side, a small saucer of rather runny jam. Very good on a hot day like this, I must say. And female hysterics. So we get this very interesting portrait of this man, not through who he is, what he does, how he looks, but what he loves and how he relates to the world. And it separates out into this exotic world, this spiritual world, and this world of adventure against the world of domesticity from which he seems to be recoiling. I wonder whether anybody has any thoughts as to how it might end. I haven't translated the last line very deliberately. If anybody wants to suggest anything in the chat quickly, I would be delighted to hear your thoughts. Aha, thank you, Natalia. But I was his wife. Is this your suggestion, or do you know the poem? Okay. Are there any other suggestions out there from people? Well, let's go on and see how it ends. And I was his wife. You can also translate the as a but. Russian has 3 words, in fact: I for and, no for but, and then a, which is somewhere in the middle. This poem was written by the 20th century poet Anna Akhmatova, and here I've shown one of the most famous portraits of her, with this beautiful cubist landscape behind, with her very striking profile, her dark hair, and her very characteristic dress of a shawl. And on the right, you can see her husband, Nikolai Gumilyov, a bit of a dandy, perhaps, dressed here in his smart tie and collar, straw hat and flower in his buttonhole. They had an important, he was also a poet, but he was also an adventurer and traveler. And it's a very strange poem, perhaps, for a wife to write to her husband, because it never says that he loved her. So a rather anti-poem or anti-love poem in many ways. And it's very characteristic of Akhmatova's early poetry, which often takes this ironic approach to human relationships and situations. And it will often build a situation, and we saw there 3 lines about the things that he did like, 3 lines about the things that he didn't like, and then a sudden ironic, cynical final line, which changes the tone entirely. Here is another picture of Akhmatova in profile, again with her hair up, very strikingly dressed, again with a shawl. And you can see here on the right a rather different picture of her. In the 1960s, Akhmatova came to Oxford to receive an honorary doctorate. And you can see here Akhmatova as a rather older, stouter woman with graying hair, receiving her honorary doctorate as one of the greatest poets of the Russian 20th century, surrounded by 4 men in academic dress. Oxford isn't always like that, I have to tell you. So I should wrap up now because my time is coming to an end. So thank you for your attention. I hope you found these 2 poems interesting in themselves, but also got a certain sense of what we might do with poems like that here in Oxford in a tutorial or a seminar or a class, reading very slowly, building a case and analysis word by word, thinking about word order, register, tone, imagery, thinking about translation, but paying attention as well, not just to the meaning of poetry, but to its sounds, its structures, and its forms. It's one of the most satisfying things to do. It's a very satisfying way I find for teaching. It's also one of the things we often ask students to do when they come for interview here in Oxford. We give them a poem in Russian if they've studied Russian, or in English if they haven't studied Russian, and we let you spend some time reading it, and then you come and talk to us about it. And the idea is here not about right or wrong answers, but is to think about how you advance a case, an argument, or an interpretation on the basis of textual evidence. So I hope that's been of some interest, maybe even some enjoyment. And if there are any questions, I'd be very happy to take them in the chat. Otherwise, good luck with everything, and thank you for joining us. It's very good of you to give your time to us today. Thank you, Lola, in the chat. Thank you, Natalia, as well. Spasibo.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Rowan.
Thank you, Philip. I'll just leave a bit of space for the thank yous to keep coming in, but if there are any other questions that people want to ask Philip, just to reiterate, you can ask those questions now, or alternatively, please do get in touch with us via the college website, and we're really happy to respond to any questions. Philip, something I've been asking all of the tutors this afternoon, if you're wanting to get into this sort of area, are there particular follow-ups you'd recommend? I guess Nabokov might be a kind of an obvious start point, or?
Nabokov is wonderful, and especially if you try one of his Russian novels rather than the American novels. But even the American novels are great and have Russian characters. He's an obvious one. Akhmatova is very accessible. I mean, I was trying, a lot of people say that poetry is what is lost in translation, but in the hands of a great writer or translator or poet like Nabokov could be, it's often gained. And so I think reading her story, which is a fascinating story, we read there a little love lyric from her early work, around 1910. She went on to become the great chronicler of the Stalinist purges, and she wrote an extraordinary poem called Requiem, which she wrote in the late 1930s, committed to memory, and shared it with her women friends. It's all about the women who were left behind during the purges and how they communicated with their husbands and their sons in the prison camps. And a number of women were trusted with this poem, and they committed it to memory until after Stalin's death, it could be written down again for the first time. And that poem could be well read in English. It's a beautiful work that translates that. But really, I mean, there's so much out there. Ask friends, family, curious teachers. And oh, here, Rowan. First year of beginners Russians, we don't let you study literature. Is poetry still used in language classes? Very good question, Rowan. Yeah, so our beginners Russian program is very intense here. In the first year, you do 7 or 8 hours a week of Russian language. And at the end of the first year, you take 4 language exams. And then the second year, you go abroad to consolidate your knowledge of the language. But you're right here, Rowan. We do use exactly what I've just done today, actually. We do use poetry in Russian in the second and third terms to give you something to read, to show you that you're already able to understand complex literary Russian, to comment on it, to say interesting things about it. You don't write essays and commentaries on it as you would be doing in French or German or Spanish or your other language. But we very much do use literature as a way of teaching language. And that goes throughout the course as a whole. We make you read in the original if you come with A-level or equivalent. And if you're a beginner's language, you soon begin to be comfortable and fluent about reading the original. That reinforces your language skills, and your language skills allow you to read confidently in the original. So yeah, it's a good point. The 2 halves of the degree are very closely connected, and they reinforce each other. So from the January of your first year already, you would be reading short but complex and interesting poetry in the original. And I sometimes take those classes, and I very much enjoy doing so.